Good evening. Afghanistan and China both are very close and important neighbors for Pakistan, and any developments taking place in these two countries uh, directly affect Pakistan and Pakistan's foreign policy. Since the takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan, no country officially recognized the Taliban government. But last month in January, the president of China, Xi Jinping, accepted the credentials of the new appointed Afghan ambassador. Now, what are its implications and what does it mean? Since then, my viewers have been asking me to have a vlog on Afghanistan China relations and its dynamics for the region. And today, luckily, I have found the right person. Ambassador Arif Ayub has been very kind to join me in this vlog. We all know Ambassador Arif is an expert on the international relations in general, but particularly on Afghanistan. So, Ambassador Arif Ayub, sir, thank you very much. Welcome to my program.
Thank you. It was very kind of you to ask me. So, on
It's
China and Afghanistan relations, I would place it in the Silk and Belt Road context
Before you
because,
get into that, I just want to clarify one thing for my viewers.
please.
If we can understand what does recognition mean in international relations now, because still people are saying, well, now that they have accepted the ambassadors, it is a formal recognition, but some people say no, they have still not uh, recognized per se, and yet they are conducting all the official uh, activities. So in your opinion, when do we say yes, one country has recognized the other?
Recognition is basically a political issue. So, the legal issues come later. There's de facto recognition, which most of the world has done with the Taliban. And then there's de jure recognition, which no one has done so far. And the reason for that is very simple because when the Taliban had the agreement with the US, it specifically mentioned that firstly there would be a withdrawal, but conditional on that would be that the Taliban stop supporting terrorists. So that second part of the agreement has not been honored by the Taliban. So that has created the political problem of recognition, in which most countries accept the Taliban de facto, but not de jure. The Chinese move has gone one step further in accepting credentials of the ambassador, but they have still specifically said that they still do not recognize the Taliban regime because they also have a problem with the terrorists from ATIM, whom the Taliban consider freedom fighters. So that is still the basic problem with all the countries.
So fair enough. I hope the premise is understood by the viewers. So now before we come to the present, we need to understand the dynamics of the relationship from you as you were going to start, how it started and uh, where it is today.
The Chinese government has always had good relations with Afghanistan since its inception in 1948, and of course even before that in the Kuomintang government. And they've had that link through the Wakhan corridor, and that's always been a peaceful link, and it's always been open, not very much used because of the terrain, but the links have always been there. And when the Russians tried to change the neutrality of Afghanistan through their invasion in 1979, the Chinese accepted the plea of the rest of the world that this was an actual invasion and the rest of the world should stand up to it as it had broken international treaties and commitments the UN Charter, and most importantly, the Anglo-Russian Convention of, I think, 1908, in which Russia had declared that Afghanistan would be outside its sphere of influence. So the Chinese took a very strong stand and were supporting us wholeheartedly and were supporting the jihad wholeheartedly, even though financially they were, the money was being given by Saudi Arabia and the US. The armaments were mostly being obtained from China.
They probably also helped in training the Mujahideens.
No, I don't think so. Training was all through Pakistan and the ISI. In fact, I remember Colonel Ramam told me that his group personally in Peshawar and Quetta trained about 125,000 Mujahideen. So it was entirely a Pakistani effort. But the armaments were mostly Chinese because for some reason they wanted deniability and they thought that if it's Chinese equipment, it would not look as bad as if you were using US equipment.
You have very correctly pointed out it's a long relationship, but there has also been a feeling that probably, especially during the war on terror, while China has maintained independent relations economically, trade wise, all that, but politically China, if we can say, has always taken the advice of Pakistan in dealing with the Afghanistan. Is that impression correct? And now
Yes, they
probably.
used to like the US and the European Union and UK. They used to work very closely with Pakistan on this issue. So that has never changed. They've always been very close, but of course they've maintained their links to. There was a Maoist group, if I remember, in the old days, which was also against the invasion. If I remember correctly, called Sama, or I've forgotten the exact name, but a very small Maoist group, which was one of the smallest communist groups in Afghanistan. So they maintained contacts with all sides, like we did, even though we did not recognize the communist government in Kabul. There was de facto recognition, and the transit trade continued, and bilateral trade continued. And we both had our embassies and consulates and charge d'affaires in the capitals. So de jure recognition was withheld, but de facto recognition was there.
So, how do you see? Probably China did not enjoy very good relations with the first Taliban regime. They had their reservations because of the Eastern Turkestan Islamic Party of Turkestan and the concerns that it may spill over to their borders. But with this Taliban regime, even before the US left, China had started engaging the Taliban. And now we see the results of that China has immediately formed links. Of course, China has its interest there. But how do you see the Chinese presence in Afghanistan today in terms of the geopolitics of the region?
Well, firstly, a slight correction. They had links with the first regime of the Taliban as well, because when I was in Kabul in 2000, a delegation from the Communist Party of China visited and held high-level discussions with the Taliban, both in Kabul and in Kandahar. So they've always maintained their links with the groups in Afghanistan. And even during the second jihad against the US, in that too, they played a major role in contacts with the Taliban. So it's a continuation of that relationship, but it's now focused mostly on the economic side. As I said in the beginning, it's part of their plan for the Silk and Belt Road initiative, the Silk Route, the old Silk Route, because in that Afghanistan can play a pivotal role. With the Pakistan-Karakoram highway, the problem is that for 6 months it's closed due to snow and the height. And the height is so much that the local truckers were telling me that 1/4 to 1/3 of their load has to be left behind so the trucks can climb up to 16,000 feet. So that creates a problem of logistics and of cost. So the routes through Afghanistan, especially the Herat-Kandahar route, avoids these high mountains, and it can be easily connected to Central Asia by road and by rail. So the rail connection between South Asia and Central Asia, of course, passes through Pakistan, but the rail link is through Afghanistan. As Toynbee said, if you remember, that it was the roundabout of civilizations. So they're hoping to that Afghanistan would play once again in history its traditional role as bringing civilizations together as a center for trade routes as well.
Even Iqbal had called it a heart. So the importance is, of course, undeniable. So, coming to Taliban, how do you see the uh, foreign policy or general governance of the Taliban? Have they lived up to the expectations or they have exceeded the expectations?
The Taliban have a very strange attitude towards governance. In law and order and in justice, it seems they're as close to perfection as is possible, without any major presence or major arms or any severe hardship. They managed to control the law and order in the Pashtun areas extremely well. I remember when I was there in Kabul, we used to go to Afghanistan from Chaman and Torkham without any escort, without any weapons. And only when we were in Pakistan, we needed the weapons in our own tribal area and the escorts from the FC and the Khasadars. But in Afghanistan, it was completely peaceful. There was never any problem in the Pashtun areas. The trouble used to arise firstly in the non-Pashtun areas, and nowadays, of course, in the more extremist groups, which are also Islamist but opposed to the Taliban. So that has affected their law and order situation somewhat. But slowly, it seems that they're managing to control the situation. There's been no really major catastrophe so far. So far as the Chinese are concerned, it's mostly they're concerned now on the economic side. Even when the Americans were there, they were taking advantage of the American presence to make some major deals, like the Anak copper mine
Copper mines.
near Ghazni, in which it seems they've already paid a signing bonus of about $300 billion. And the problem there is that there is no infrastructure in Afghanistan, as you know, and whatever little was there has been destroyed between the wars with Russia and the US. And also, then they have made payments and taken concessions for oil and gas drilling in the north, in which there's supposed to be substantial reserves. Nothing compared to the Middle East, but still quite substantial. In fact, during the Russian days, they were already had a fertilizer factory based on the local gas near Mazar Sharif. And of
Also,
course, it's sorry.
lithium, rare earth metals for which Afghanistan is famous.
Uh, well, it's famous for a lot of things. I think both the Russians and the Americans have done extensive surveys, and the preliminary estimate is that there's nearly $3 trillion worth of minerals in Afghanistan. So the finding the minerals is not a problem. The surveys have been done since the last 50, 60 years now. The problem is that whether these getting these minerals out of the ground are feasible or not. because there is a problem, of course, firstly, law and order, secondly, logistics. Thirdly, there's no electricity. All the electricity is being imported from the Central Asian countries. So until these hurdles are overcome, the minerals are most probably going to remain in the ground. Nothing much is going to happen there.
But they have started now. I think copper is being extracted, so the rest will also follow because once the Chinese are there, they are capable of extracting anything from the earth.
Yes, of course, and hopefully they'll link it with what the concession they have in Pakistan with Sendak, which is basically the same seam is carrying throughout this whole area. And they can hopefully gain economies of scale, but so far it's still very small scale. And of course, the smelting plant is out of the question because there's no electricity there.
So far it seems that the Taliban have probably proved their critics wrong and they are doing well so far. Where do you see Afghanistan in the overall? You mentioned already the Silk Route, but the uh, overall Belt and Road Initiative and particularly C.
In the Belt and Road, it seems that they will do better than us because their cities and roads are more accessible than ours are when linking up with China.
And stability.
Punjab has this. Punjab has this major problem of being closed in winter, and of course, it's almost impossible to make a train. If you want, it'll be horrendously expensive. I don't think the cost benefit is going to work out for a train. But on the Herat Kandahar route, both the roads and railroads are very easy to make. So I think the Afghans will link up sooner than we will, the way things are moving. And as you said, the Chinese speed is unbelievable. So they can obviously manage it. But it's going to take a long time to get the infrastructure together to get these projects off the ground, especially the lithium project. That's going to take some time.
All right. Now, you have very rightly pointed out that the uh, Chinese main interest, not only in Afghanistan but in the rest of the world, also is the priority remains economy and trade. But how do you see the bigger problem, the East Turkestan I mentioned earlier? Because it is stated that there are still some Uyghurs fighted which are stationed in Afghanistan. Probably the Taliban had shifted them slightly off from Badakhshan, but still uh, that problem exists. Or you think it has already been sorted out between China and Afghanistan?
No, you're absolutely right. It's a problem which exists not only for China, but with all the countries bordering
Central
Afghanistan.
Asia.
So the Uzbek IMU is there, and the Tajik Islamist movements are there. The Uyghur movements are there, as you just mentioned. ETIM is there, and our TTP is there. So all the regional countries have this problem with Afghanistan, and that is the main reason they are not being recognized. So they have to take this matter seriously because the rest of their neighbors are taking it seriously and have made it a condition before recognition is granted.
Which probably seems to be forthcoming sooner or later.
With the with the Taliban, it's extremely difficult because it's a logical movement. So they don't normally go on rationality or logic. We had the same problem last time with Osama bin Laden and the Arab terrorists, which they claim were freedom fighters. And now we're having the same problem with all the other groups, which we call terrorists, and they still consider freedom fighters. So with the ideological movement, it's very difficult to have a straightforward relationship. There will always be this gray area in between.
How do you see Pakistan's relations with Afghanistan at the moment, and what is your prediction in the near future?
Unfortunately, we are looking at Afghanistan only from the military angle. So long as that is the policy, I don't think that things are going to improve. They're going to get worse because security is important, but uh, there are other things in economy and the life too, which have to be taken to account, especially our relationship with Afghanistan since 1947. And if you just look at it from a narrow military security point of view, things are just going to get worse.
Everybody seems to be talking about nowadays a shift from security to geoeconomics. But what you are saying is that on ground, we have still not been able to change our mindset.
Yes, talk is easy, but no one listens to the talk. Everyone listens to the actions you're taking on the ground. And actions on the ground are all security related and all induced to make Afghanistan even more hostile. So I do not see, as long as this military led foreign policy is being continued, I do not see any improvement in relations with Afghanistan.
But even the military leaders are talking of geoeconomics.
Yes, as I said, they're talking, but no one ever listens to what people say. They always listen at what the actions are.
Just your closing remarks about, in general, the Taliban governance, if you think we have missed out anything, and the future of uh, the Afghan government, whether with Taliban or without Taliban, whatever.
Well, on Afghanistan, it's impossible to predict anything. No one has ever predicted Afghanistan accurately. But the change now which has happened is that there is an ideological movement in control of the country. And this is a very old ideological movement. It's, as you know, they're Deobandis, which started in Deoband, Delhi, about 1858, 59, immediately after the mutiny. So it has very deep roots and in an anti-colonial and anti-imperialistic struggle. So it is not something which has been imposed by anyone. It is something which has come up from below in Afghanistan, at least in the Pashtun areas. So that seems that will continue for some time. The problem is, again, the ethnicity. That ethnicity is the strongest factor in Afghanistan, which has created this internal problem for the last 60, 70 years. And until they deal with the ethnicity problem correctly in a way in which there's a consensus in Afghanistan, the problems, internal problems, are going to continue. There are advantages that it's so far not a corrupt movement, and they're trying to do their best for the country based on its own resources. So they've started agriculture projects in the north with the Oxus River, which has created problems with Central Asia, but hopefully they can sort them out. And in other fields, they're cooperating with the Chinese. And once they solve this, which other countries feel is a terrorism issue, then things can definitely improve for Afghanistan, not only with Central Asia, but also with us. That is the biggest problem, hurdle in our relationship with them right now.
You think they have the support of the masses now?
No, they have never had support of masses. They have support of the Pashtun areas only. In the other areas, even now, though they've got some control and minor support, if there was an election, they would be like our religious parties. No one would give them the majority vote. But thing is, they have fought two jihads, once against the Russians and one against the US, and defeated both superpowers. So that is something of which they are proud, and the Afghans respect them for it. So on that basis, they can continue, but until they give real hope and economic growth and activity to the people, things will still remain a bit messy over there, and until they achieve this political consensus, things will still be a bit tense.
If they perform economically well, that will probably improve their acceptability in the general masses.
Yes, definitely. That's why the link with China is so important, because China is the only country which can provide the large investments needed to start up the infrastructure as well as these projects. So hopefully, if they move on the ETIM, China would be able to move in a bigger way over in the economic field in Afghanistan.